Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a very warm afternoon in Delhi. But we're really excited to hold this conversation, and I'm delighted to introduce our two speakers. We have with us Professor Geeta Kingdon. Just to introduce her, she holds the Chair of Education and International Development at the Institute of Education, University College in London. Prior to this, she worked at the Department of Economics, University of Oxford for 10 years. She's been doing a lot of research on the economics of education across different countries. And so we're really excited to have you share with us your recent work on teachers and pupil-to-teacher ratios and teacher shortages and vacancies. We are also excited to have with us as a discussant, Dr. Geeta Kingdon. She will be joining us online. Thank you so much, Dr. Kingdon, for joining us. Again, just to introduce Dr. Kingdon, she is part of EIU Consultants Private Limited, which stands for Education. I want to get it wrong. Educational Resource Unit, right? Dr. Kingdon has done extensive work in the field of elementary education, girls' education, women empowerment, health, nutrition, education, and childcare practices, and was involved in the conceptualization of Mahila Samakhya and has also worked with the Ministry of Human Resource Development, now Ministry of Education. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're really looking forward to an interesting discussion and talk. As I said to some people, this is our, as an accountability initiative's first hybrid event. So we're excited to have people both physically in the room, but also joining us online. So thank you for those who made the time to come in physically, but also those who joined us online. Over to you, Geeta.
Thank you very much, Avni, for that generous introduction. And I'm in awe of Center for Policy Research for all the fantastic work that it happens here. Informing policy makers about evidence helps them to make, one hopes, better policy. And therefore, to have a think tank, which is it's not opinion-based think tank, it's not armchair, sort of advisors, it is a think tank that, so far as I can see, my brush with it is the amount of research that emanates from here, which is very evidence-based. It's based on data. It's also, making quite a lot of effort to triangulate data from different sources, because our data in this our country is not very clean data, and often we find discrepancies with different data sources. So to make sense of that data, to then be able to show the policymaker that, look, this is what reconciles these differences and therefore aids understanding. I think that's an incredibly valuable service that CPR performs. The accountability initiative, just the name, the word accountability is not really in the lexicon very much. So to have that as a program that runs here, PESA initiative, my own specialism is economics of education. So one might think, why do we need economists for analysis of education? And it's a good question, but the thing is that money matters in every aspect of life, and resources are always scarce. In any sector, it could be agriculture, transport, it could be environment, any sector, resources are scarce. So how to best use those resources is what the job of an education economist is. So education economists are also very evidence-driven people. So that's why Avni and I have encounters from time to time at fora, like, for example, the Comptroller and Auditor General's forum. And I've used the research that emanates from here, particularly your research on, per pupil expenditure by governments, state governments, based on the state budgets and so on and so forth. So a lot of really, the kind of work that emanates from here, which I follow, is very similar to the work that I do. And it's fantastic to see that there is an institute here that is very interested in this sort of work. So I'm with friends here. And I'm really grateful that Vimala Ramachandran has consented to be the discussant for this paper, because Vimala ji is a very knowledgeable person in this field. I know that in 2014, she led this 9-state study of teachers at NEPA. And, she was the principal investigator in that. She had a large team of people, and she put on the table new research, new things that were just not known about teachers in India before. So it was quite a seminal study. And the reason why I read it is, I mean, I would have ultimately probably read it anyway, but I was the peer reviewer for that study. So now I think Vimla is paying me back by being a peer reviewer for today's presentation. And I hope my co-author of the paper that I'm presenting today, Dr. Sandeep Datta, who is he's joined the Delhi School of Economics just a year and 3 months ago. I hope he's been able to join the session. I just want to make sure. Yes, he's been able to join. So I don't know whether it's possible to make him a panelist, to upgrade him to a panelist status. Sandeep Datta is the name. Thank you. So I will start my presentation. I'd just like to share my screen. Just want to make sure that Sandeep is here and is able to say hello to everybody. Sandeep, can we, well, you can at least say hello even if you're not visible. I think he had other commitments as well at the same time. Okay, so just share the screen. Sandeep, did you want to say hello to everybody? There's maybe about 20, 25 people here.
Yeah, hi, hello everyone. Hello. Sorry, my video is not working, so I could not switch on. So, good afternoon.
No worries. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is a paper titled Teacher Shortage in India, the Myth or Reality, and it's co-authored with Dr. Sandeep Datta and myself. He's at the Delhi School of Economics. My introduction has just been given. It's widely believed that pupil-teacher ratio being high is a problem for learning levels of children, and many countries stipulate maximum pupil-teacher ratios. Pupil-teacher ratio should not go beyond some specified maximum. In order to lower pupil-teacher ratios, teachers are appointed. In order to reduce the pupil-teacher ratios, or if you like to reduce class size, these are very similar concepts. These are pedagogic justifications for teacher appointments. But of course, there are also, there may be political economy justifications for teacher appointments. For example, some politicians may use greater number of teacher appointments as an opportunity to extend patronage or for electoral gain. Teachers themselves may prefer more appointments if it allows them to be, like to share coming to school on alternate days. If there's chronic absenteeism, which we know there is because of the surveys of teacher absence rates that have been done, then we know that schools do inflate enrollment numbers in order to get more resources. The extent to which they do it is not known. Whether all schools do it is not known. But anecdotally, there is we hear, it is heard quite commonly that student numbers are inflated in the rolls, in the self-reported enrollment numbers that schools provide when they fill out the UDISE data capture format, because that's a self-filled form. And if it is the case that enrollment is inflated, then obviously the number of teachers seem to be required in order to fulfill the norms, the teacher allocation norms of the Right to Education Act. There'll be more teachers required if the numbers are inflated compared to the teachers that may actually be needed if there had not been any inflation of enrollment. And so that could be a possible third reason why more teachers are appointed. And India's Right to Education Act stipulates a maximum pupil-teacher ratio of 30. Now, against this background, what this paper does is to examine the widespread perception that India has an acute teacher shortage. This is a view that has been repeated in India's National Education Policy 2020, which promises to urgently fill the acute teacher shortage, to urgently fill these 1 million teacher vacancies. And what was the genesis of this paper was the following. If you look at this slide, which shows the statements that various people have made about the shortage of teachers. So in fact, at the top, I have a statement from a CPR, researcher Kiran Bhatti, saying that without, not much can be done without addressing the huge shortage of teachers. Ministry of Human Resource Development, UNESCO, Niti Aayog, education ministers, newspapers are all saying that we have a shortage of teachers across the state. 74 countries face an acute teacher shortage, while Nigeria tops this list. India is second. No funds, no policy, few teachers. Former director of the NCERT, says this, and so on and so forth. So there is a very widespread belief that there's an acute shortage of teachers. Now, that when one hears that, and what I also saw is this trends report in the UDISE data, District Information System on Education. So this is taken from, if you look at the right at the bottom, it shows elementary education in India, progress towards UEE, Universal Elementary Education, flash statistics. So this shows, if you look at the row that has got a box in it, halfway down that pink box, you see this thing says pupil-teacher ratio elementary. Yeah, at the elementary level, what is the pupil-teacher ratio? So you can see in the year 2005-06, 36 pupils per teacher. And in 708, it goes down to 33, then to 32, then in 2010-11, it is 30. That was the year in which April 2010 was the year in which the Right to Education Act was meant to be implemented from 1st of April. In that year, it was already 30, and then it fell precipitously. And by the latest date that is here, 2015-16, pupil-teacher ratio was 24. And if you look at the box below on the right-hand side, which shows 2015-16, the middle bullet point in that says PTR, pupil-teacher ratio in government schools is 25, aided schools 22, private and aided schools 24. So PTR in public schools was already 25 in the year 2015-16. Now we know that, long-term there has been a migration of children away from the government sector and towards the private schooling sector. That's one fact. And the other fact is that the number of teacher appointments has been increasing. So there is a double whammy why pupil-teacher ratio has fallen in this quite a dramatic way. There's a double whammy why pupil-teacher ratio has fallen this rapidly. One is that the number of students in the government schooling sector has been declining, monotonically over time. And secondly, that the number of teacher appointments has been increasing despite the falling enrollment in the government sector. So because of these two factors that are both reinforce each other, the pupil-teacher ratio has fallen dramatically from 36 to 24 in a period of about 10 years. Now, as per the government statistics, pupil-teacher ratio in government elementary schools is 25. As per the Right to Education Act, which stipulates the teacher allocation norms, on how many children will a teacher be given. Those norms are enshrined in the Right to Education Act schedule. And that allows a maximum of 30 teachers per school. 30 pupils per teacher. But we know that pupil-teacher ratio by the government own statistics is 25. So already there is a surplus of teachers. If one was to look at the aggregate figure, one would say that how can there be an acute shortage of teachers in the country if the pupil-teacher ratio, the maximum that is allowed is 30, and it is already significantly lower than that. It's already 25. So if anything, there's a surplus of teachers instead of there being a deficit, let alone an acute teacher deficit. So these two things did not hang together. That was the genesis of the interest in researching this topic. The apparent contradiction between two sources of data that are coming from government. Because where is this figure of 1 million teacher shortages in the country coming from? It's coming from the statement of the HRD minister in Parliament, the reply to an unstarred question, And these questions come up frequently. In the last four years, this question of how many teacher vacancies there are in the country has come up 3 times. And each time the HRD minister has given figures in Parliament, which are available, downloadable from the Parliament's website and other places. And it's that is what the National Education Policy has also cited to say that there's 1 million teacher vacancies. That is what the source is for the Niti Aayog citing that there's 1 million teacher vacancies in the country. And yet, the fact that there is that acute teacher shortage is totally inconsistent with the fact that the published government's own figures show that pupil-teacher ratio is already significantly lower than what is allowed as per the Act. So it raises the question of what is the reality? And that's the reason why we've written this paper, Sandeep and I. So as I said, there's this widespread perception, but reality may be somewhat different, at least prima facie from what this shows. So one really important fact that comes out, and the thing is not showing what's showing here is not reflected on the screens.
I think you go away from screen.
Oh, I see. Okay,
so
I should just remain on this.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'll do that.
But what you can do is just increase this.
Oh, yeah,
from
that's a
83
good
to
point.
100.
Yeah, it's a great thought. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, that's smart. Yeah, thanks. That's great. So, one really important fact that has a bearing on all of this is the fact that the Kothari Commission, which sat between 1964 and 66, and which was the first education commission in post-independence India, it recommended something which has become a kind of a guiding light for the policymaker, and which has been this principle that it enunciated that every child in India should have a elementary school, a primary school available within a 1 kilometer walking distance of every habitation. Okay, that single goal, which has been reiterated in the commitment to that has been reiterated in the Right to Education Act, Section 6. It has led to the creation of a very large number of extremely small schools. When we say extremely small, how many are we talking about? So this goal has led to about 500,000 schools that have less than or equal to 60 pupils. What does less than or equal to mean? If it's less than or equal to, it could mean 59 children, but could also mean 5 children. What is the average number of children in schools that have 60 or fewer children? The answer is 31 children is the average number of children. In roughly 500,000 schools, really nearly 5 lakh schools, the average number of children enrolled in the school by the school's own self-reported enrollment data is 31 children in about 5 lakh schools. Well, actually the number is 4,70,000 schools. So question is, should this have any implications for teacher appointments? And the other factor that has led to this problem is that, the rise of private schooling has also led to an increase in the exodus from the another reason why the government schools are small is not just because every habitation has to have one, and therefore it can only be small. That's not the only factor. Another factor leading to tiny school size or small school size is the fact that private schools have also cropped up in many, many places. And there has been a kind of a migration from public schools to private schools in many places. And it's a massive migration because in the last 9 years, well, 2019-20 is the latest data that's available, UDISE data. In between 2010 and 2019, 2.7 crore children, 27 million children have migrated out of the government schooling sector. And the number that have entered the private unaided schooling sector is 2.4 crore. So the other 0.3 crore, we don't know whether they've gone to aided schools or whether they've gone to the unrecognized private unaided schools. But at any rate, the point is that gone away from the government schooling sector. So that's led to the minifying of government schools, the further minifying schools. Now, in this table, we tried to show the reality of public elementary schools, and what we see, if you look at the row in which I have put some circles in the numbers, that is, so this on the left hand side is a column which shows that in the year 2019-20, as per UDISE data, this is only government schools. This whole table is only for government elementary schools. If we look at those schools, first of all, look at the last row, which is all government elementary schools. It shows that there are 9,78,401 government elementary schools. We did this analysis just for 21 major states, but those states constitute together 97% of the population of the country. So therefore, this is pretty much the whole of India. Now, in 2017-18 data, when I had first done this analysis, it was done with 2017-18 data. And what we found is that there were 10,35,000 government elementary schools. In the 2 years between 2017-18 and 2019-20, in Uttar Pradesh, about 26,000 schools, government elementary schools, merged, together. So there was a reduction of about 26,000 government elementary schools, from about 1,61,000 to about 1,34,000 or something like that, thousand. And in Madhya Pradesh, about 20,000 schools also merged together. Anyhow, there's roughly 10 lakh government elementary schools. About 4,70,000 of them have 60 or fewer children. That means 48% of all government elementary schools in the country have 60 or fewer children. And if you go further down that row, you see that the average number of pupils per school in these 4,70,000 schools is 31 children per school. The pupil-teacher ratio in these nearly 500,000 schools is 13.3 children per teacher. And that is as per the school's own self-report of their enrollment numbers and their teacher numbers. And of course, if you look at the row immediately above, the number of schools that have 20 or fewer children, there were 1,29,424 such schools, nearly 1,30,000 schools. So about 13 or 14% of all government elementary schools are so small as to have 20 or fewer children in them. So what is the average number of children in them? Because 20 or fewer can mean that they can have 19 children, but they could also have 5 or 10 or 12, 15 children as well. Average number of children is 12.7 children in these 1,30,000 schools. 12.7 children per school, and pupil-teacher ratio here is 6.8 children per teacher. And one can look at other cuts of the data. So next we looked at the pupil-teacher ratio in different states, and we can see what percentage of schools have pupil-teacher ratios below given level. So we can see that here this I picked out, which shows percentage of public elementary schools that have a pupil-teacher ratio below 15 pupils per teacher. And we can see that the hilly states, 74%, 73%, Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal, 74% of all public elementary schools have a pupil-teacher ratio below 15, and so on. We can see all the way down to Andhra Pradesh, which is most of the major states. We can see that the pupil-teacher ratio, the percentage of schools that have a pupil-teacher ratio below 15 is, anywhere between about 30% and 60%, even if we take the non-hilly states into account. And overall, it is 30.9% of schools, public elementary schools, that have a pupil-teacher ratio below 15. About 15% of all public elementary schools in the country have a pupil-teacher ratio below 10. And those that have a pupil-teacher ratio below 20 is 47% of all public elementary schools. Now, this is, they say that a picture tells 1,000 words. And I just wanted you to focus on this picture, if you will, for a minute. This shows, this is a histogram showing the distribution of public elementary school, size. So the horizontal axis is the number of children enrolled in a school, and the vertical axis shows the frequency of schools of that size. So first of all, we see that it's a skewed distribution. It's a kind of a log normal distribution. That means the vast bulk of all schools, public elementary schools, the whole paper is about, government elementary schools. So let me not repeat that. So a vast proportion of all schools, public elementary schools, are very small. If you look at the mode, it occurs at 30. That tall little spike that you see here. Yeah, that's at 30. That means that's the mode. And in fact, what is the median? I can tell you the median is 63 children. If you take roughly 10 lakh public elementary schools, the median enrollment, which is the median is the best measure of central tendency when a quantity is log normally distributed, such as school size evidently is log normally distributed. So if you had to give one number, what is school size in India? In government elementary schools, the answer is 63 children per school. You can contrast that with many other countries because it raises the question about, is this a viable school size for being properly resourced, both with human resources and with all kinds of other resources? So I think the policy choice that we made in 1964 to 66, which may have had a lot of logic behind it in terms of permitting access to education locally and very easily, that logic has led us down a particular route, which today is raising the problem of how do we resource these schools, how do we make them high quality. Yeah, this is the DISE data of 2019-20. So that's like I gave the example that, so absolutely yes, the answer is yes. And just to give that example, that if you look at DISE 2017-18 and you look at DISE 19-20, 2 years later, the previous DISE had, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, that would have showed 1,60,000 or so public elementary schools. Now it's showing 1,34,000. When I talked to the director of basic education, he said that, ma'am, in Uttar Pradesh, the problem was, and I talked to Rashmi Shami, who's the principal secretary of education at Madhya Pradesh, she also gave exactly the same reason. They both said that in our state, there are so many schools that in the same one venue, the same one building, they were bifurcated, they were reported as two separate schools, a primary school with grade 1 to 5 and an upper primary school with grade 6 to 8, even though it was one single school. So what we've done now is that our first port of call, as far as school merger or consolidation is concerned, is to call these a single school, which were up hitherto designated as two separate schools, which they weren't really. So it was a chimera. It was a sort of a myth that we had that there are 1,60,000 government elementary schools in Uttar Pradesh. They were only 1,34,000 or whatever, even before any consolidation. So this is the reality as of at the moment, as of at with the latest data that's available. Now, this is the picture for India as a whole. What we are seeing here is this very bizarre pattern that, let's say exactly at 30, there's a massive number, this peak that you see here. It is very unusual because why should it be that there's some magic about 30, right? It is an artifact. You can see that when it comes to 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, particularly huge jump at 60 and a huge dip just before 60. So what is this? What it suggests is that schools that have an enrollment of maybe 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, they're not reporting the true enrollment. They're reporting 61 or 62 or 63, right? That is why there's this big jump over here. Again, you see the jump at 90, but then you see in a very big way again at 100. Reason is that at 101, at 101 you see that. At 100, like above 100, a junior school is entitled to get a headmaster or headmistress. So we see that at points at which, for example, at 60, because at 61, you get an extra teacher. Because for enrollment up to 60, as per the teacher allocation norms of the Right to Education Act, you get 2 teachers if you have enrollment up to 60. If you have enrollment from 61 to 90, you get 3 teachers. 91 to 120, you get 4 teachers. And it goes on like that till 150 for a primary school. If enrollment is above 150, you get a headmaster in primary. In upper primary, you get 3 teachers, irrespective of what your enrollment is, up to 100 children, 100. And then you get, sorry, I think it's up to 90. You get 3 teachers. And then at 100, above 100, you get 1 headmaster, and so on and so forth. Now, this is for Uttar Pradesh. Now, if we go, sorry, this is for India as a whole. Now, if I wanted to show you the picture, for equivalent picture for Uttar Pradesh as well, because it's a little extreme. Here's the picture for Uttar Pradesh. So it really is, you know, look at the massive jump at 101. Enrollment of 101. Yeah. And the rounding at, you know, for example, at 50, there's a low, and at, you know, or 50, there's a big jump. At 60, there's a big jump, and so on and so forth. So there's rounded reporting. Now, to some extent, that's quite legitimate, because you see, quite a lot of children are absentee. It's not really, you know, some children have quite a tenuous connection with the school. So it's kind of understandable that although on your rolls, you know, you may have, let's say, 54 children enrolled, but you actually see less than that. So you may say, I've got roughly 50. So fair enough, you know, there's nothing so thing. But the fact that at 60, at 90, at 100, at 120, 150, you get these big jumps, suggests that there is some gaming of the reportage, right? Now, we also know from the reports of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, we also know from the reports of the Midday Meal Authority of India that their reports are full of, they are saying that enrollment is, reported enrollment is very significantly greater than the number of children that are found present in school that are availing, for example, the midday meal. So for instance, in one of the states, it said that the number of children who were present in school was 27% of the, talking about average of 428 schools that they sampled and went to. The number of children present in school was 27% in these 428 schools compared to the number that was in the enrollment register. So they're saying that midday meal grains are called upon on the basis of self-reported enrollment, but the number of children availing the midday meal in school on a given day in that state was 27%. I think it was Uttar Pradesh, it could have been Bihar, I can't remember. So this is these are some of the facts that suggest that there is some credence to and evidence for the fact that there may be inflated enrollment. Self-reported enrollment is overstated. So how do we know? Can we do anything about it? Because you see, if you estimate how many teachers are needed for a school on the basis of the RT's teacher allocation norm, if, for example, the number of children actually is, let's say 57, but the number of children reported is, let's say 63, if it is actually 57, the school is entitled to 2 teachers. If it's 63, the school will be entitled to 3 teachers, right? So it matters. Supposing they said 63 is enrollment, but actually, there was 10% inflation of like over-reporting of enrollment, then they would actually need only 2 teachers. But they're making the case effectively for 3 teachers because of the over. So therefore, it matters to the calculation of how many teachers we need in the country. It is better to take into account the true enrollment numbers. So how do we get at what might be called the true enrollment numbers? Now, this is a very difficult thing because we don't have states actually making an effort to try and quantify that. Now, states are aware of it because, for example, Rukmini and I had done a piece of research for Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, which is on my grant from the Spencer Foundation, 2007-08. We did a survey of 160 schools, 80 in Bihar and 80 in Uttar Pradesh, across 5 districts of Bihar, 5 districts of Uttar Pradesh. And, we found that in Bihar, 35% of enrollment, we went to the same 80 primary schools 4 times in the school year, in one school year, 2007-08. unannounced visits. And we have taken class 2 and class 4 children as our sample in those sample schools. Every child of class 2, every child of class 4. And what we did is in the first visit, we noted down the names of all the children in class 2, all the children in class 4 as per the enrollment register. And then our enumerator did a head count, called out each of the names and noted which children were present. They stood up as the name was called and so on. So it was, then we did that every single time for 4 times in the year on those 4 visits. What we found is that 35% of the children who were in the enrollment register were never in school in any of those 4 visits. So we think that 35% of children are fake enrollment. And in Uttar Pradesh, the figure was 16% of children being fake enrollment because they never found in any of the 4 visits. And at any rate, that's what we, an exercise that we had done. And we've done a lot of other things. In fact, that paper was not about this. That research was about the relative effectiveness of contract teachers and regular teachers in India. So that was a different topic. But as part of the survey, this was an incidental finding which we had among many others. So what have we done here? What I've done is as follows. This evidence is not really available for most of the states, but for some states it is. So there is a CAG report, the Comptroller and Auditor General report for Uttar Pradesh. There's a Comptroller and Auditor General report for Bihar. And there is a study which is done by some independent researcher for Haryana. Using these 3, we have made calculations in the way that I'll just explain. And then we've said that, okay, these 3 states are likely to be, or certainly Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are likely to be much more likely to be overstating enrollment numbers than maybe other states of India. So we've said, okay, let's take half of that arbitrarily and assign that number to all the other states. And, that's a working hypothesis. It's an arbitrary methodology that we've adopted. We don't want to defend that methodology. We want to say, look, this is how we've done it. We would like state governments to do it themselves or Comptroller and Auditor General to do it and come up with better numbers. But this is an arbitrary thought experiment that I have done together with Sandeep. Now, so I'll give an illustration. So for Bihar, we can see in this column, I'll just highlight this column. This is the column which is showing pupil-teacher ratio. And next to it is the column that is showing student attendance rate. Now we know this student attendance rate data is from ASER, Annual Status of Education Report. This is for government elementary schools. We see that 72% is the student attendance rate in the country, at least in these 21 major states. And we see in the box here at the bottom, we see that in Bihar, the student attendance rate is 56%. That means among all children who are enrolled, on the day that ASER survey team visited, 56% of children were found to be in school, right? So 44%, and this is very close. In fact, this is a lot better than what the government's own data shows, which shows more like 44%. Okay, I've just been passed a paper saying that time is short. So I'll try and I won't explain the methodology, but just to say quickly that 44% is the non-attendance rate, or if you like, the absence rate. Question is all of that genuinely enrolled children who are not present that day, or is there some of that is fake enrollment, overstated enrollment? How do we know? Well, CAG report shows 38% of enrollment in Bihar is fake. My survey with Rukmini showed 35%. So I've taken the 35% figure and I've said that 35% are fake, and it's showing an absence rate of 44%. 35 divided by 44 is 79%. So 79% of the so-called absence is in fact fake enrollment. When you do that for Uttar Pradesh, it comes that 16% are fake out of 40% non-attendance rate. 16 out of 40 is 40%. So Bihar, 79% fake enrollment rate. In Uttar Pradesh, 40%. In Haryana, it turns out to be 72%. We take the average of these, it comes to, I think, 62%. What we then did is to say, okay, I'll halve it and apply that to the other states. That means whatever is the absence rate of children, 31% of the absence rate is fake enrollment. So just to give them an example, for example, Tamil Nadu, it shows a student attendance rate of 91%. That means absence rate of 9%, right? So we say that 31% of that, or roughly 1/3, is fake. That means 3% of total enrollment shown there is fake enrollment. So that's why it shows put imputed national proportion of ghost enrollment 3%. Right? So that's how we've done this table. So I'll move on swiftly because now is the time for the main results. This is the main table of the paper, table 8A, teacher vacancies and teacher surpluses in 2019-20. These are the first two columns show the teacher vacancies as per the ministry's report, which is what has been cited in Parliament. So these are the teacher vacancies as per the ministry. And I'll just show the total. So it's showing 10,35,000 vacancies. Yeah, because this is 21 major states. Otherwise, if you look at India as a whole, it comes to nearly 11 lakh. Okay, in that year. Then what we have done is we have done our own calculation of teacher vacancies, and this is our estimate. If we strictly apply the teacher allocation norms of the Right to Education Act, our estimates show that instead of 10,35,000, the number of vacancies is 7,66,000. And then what we find is that what we do is that for each individual school, we see what its enrollment is. Therefore, what as per the RT Act, its number of teachers should be, and therefore whether we compare that with the actual number of teachers that are deputed there. So we know whether it's a teacher deficit school or it's a teacher surplus school. So what we find is that teacher surpluses are 5,20,141 surplus teachers. Teacher deficit is 2,40,000. Sorry. So and therefore, the teacher vacancies 7,66,000. Teacher surplus 5,20,000. Therefore, the actual number of vacancies, unfilled vacancies, if we were able to redeploy these surplus teachers to where they're needed, would be 2,46,000. So actual deficit is just under a quarter of what it is said to be by the ministry's estimates. Now, all of this calculation is without removing ghost enrollment. If we were to remove ghost enrollment, or our estimate of ghost enrollment, then what would be the situation? Then the situation would be that the number of teacher vacancies is 5,38,000. The number of surplus teachers is 6,37,000. And instead of a net deficit, there's in fact a net surplus of nearly 1 lakh teachers. Again, I want to emphasize that we are not making the claim that we have got the correct estimates of fake enrollment. This is based on the thought experiment and with the methodology of estimating fake enrollment that we have come up with, which we readily admit is arbitrary, but as a thought experiment. And then the fiscal cost, we estimate that what would be the cost of filling the 1 million vacancies if they were filled as promised by the new education policy. It says that these vacancies will be urgently filled, it says. The cost would be, in 2019-20 terms, it would be almost 64,000 crore per annum. And this is a permanent fiscal liability. And if you filled the 2,46,000 vacancies, if you didn't remove ghost enrollment and said that, okay, we will redeploy the teachers, but even after redeploying, we still have vacancies of 2 lakh, nearly 2.5 million, so 2,50,000, then the cost of that is 16,000 crore per annum. And then we've done that, separately for rural and urban areas. I'll skip that. It's in the paper. The paper is downloadable. You can read it. And then we go to the fiscal cost, and I'll just go to the bottom row. If you could just see this row, which I've highlighted right at the bottom. At the moment, the pupil-teacher ratio is 25.1. In the year 2019-20, in public elementary schools, there are 25.1 pupils per teacher. But if teachers were recruited, 1 million teachers were recruited to fill all those vacancies, the pupil-teacher ratio would fall to 19.9. And the fiscal cost, first of all, because the pupil-teacher ratio is not 30, it's 25. What is the fiscal cost of maintaining it at 25 and not at the maximum that is permissible by the RT Act? The answer is the cost of doing that is nearly 29,000 crore per annum. What is the cost due to additional planned enrollment of 1 million teachers? That is nearly 64,000 crore. If you add these two, it comes to 92,345 crore per annum, which is $12.6 billion per annum in 2019-20 terms. And this is equal to the individual GDPs of about, I think it's 70 countries, 70 poorest countries of the world. If you take individual GDPs, this is higher than 70 of the countries. I think not their total GDP, not the total of the GDP of 70 countries, but if you look at individual GDPs of 70 countries, where you would draw the line after 70 countries, that's the amount that it would cost us to fulfill this promise.
Almost close to the Narega budget.
Is it?
Last
Is it?
year, divided.
Right. And if you take ghost enrollment into account and everything, you can do the calculations again, and that amount would be even different. Now, if we maintained, so this is a thought experiment. This table shows a pupil-teacher ratio of 30 and a pupil-teacher ratio of 40. This is a hypothetical cost. So if we see again the very last row, we can see that the actual cost of teachers at the moment is 2,24,502 crore, so 2,25,000 crore roughly. If the government were to maintain a PTR of 30, it would come down to 1,95,000 crore. If it were to maintain a PTR of 40, which is the case in many of the schools of our country, which are supposedly the elite schools and so on, they maintain a pupil-teacher ratio easily of 40, 45, even 50, we see. If it were 40, it would be 1,46,000 crore. And the savings are given as well. These are just some fiscal simulation. Now, one last thing is that, you see, we have this phenomenon that I started off with earlier in our paper, that we have very small school sizes, minified schools, tiny schools. And as I said, there are about 1,30,000 government elementary schools that have a total enrollment of 20 or fewer, and an average enrollment of 12.7 pupils, and a pupil-teacher ratio of 6.8 pupils per teacher. And because the RTE Act's norms say that any school that has less than 60 children has to have 2 teachers, it means that even schools, these 1,30,000 schools that have an average number of 12.7 students, even they have to have 2 teachers. And that is why they have a pupil-teacher ratio, actual de facto pupil-teacher ratio of 6.8 pupils per teacher. If that norm were, hypothetically for a moment, as a thought experiment, if that were to be modified and it says that for any school that has 20 or fewer children, which we know the average number of children in such schools is 12.7, such a school will get 1 teacher. If that were the norm, then what would be the calculation? And basically, if that were the thing, then, you know, based on existing enrollment, without removing any fake enrollments, there is a net deficit. Instead of 2.5 lakh teachers net deficit, there is a net deficit of 1,14,000 teachers. And if you remove fake enrollment and combine that with this hypothetical rule, teacher allocation rule, then there would be about 2,40,000 surplus teachers in the country. So to summarize, we've examined the widespread perception that India has an acute shortage of 1 million teachers. This is a view repeated in the NEP 2020. We've used official DISE data. We find that there are far fewer teacher vacancies than the Ministry of Education's estimate. We also find that there are a hefty number of surplus teachers. Thus, there's a net deficit of only about a quarter as many teachers as the ministry's estimates. And in fact, if we remove Bihar, which is an outlier, in the rest of the country, there is a net deficit of only 70,145 teachers. Bihar has a whopping great deficit of 1,76,000 teachers. But we know that in Bihar, making an adjustment for fake enrollment makes a massive difference. So the number of schools that have vacancies massively comes down. And instead of 1,76,000 vacancies, it comes down to, one of the tables shows it, but I can't remember. It's one of the tables I presented earlier. Secondly, measuring teacher requirements after removing estimated fake students yields an estimated net surplus of about nearly 1 lakh teachers. Thirdly, if we remove both fake enrollment, we remove, and we alter the teacher allocation rule to adjust for the emptying of public schools, and the net teacher surplus goes from about 1 lakh to about 2,40,000. Fourthly, if the government fills the 1 million teacher vacancies, that is, as it promises, then the modest pupil-teacher ratio of 25 will fall to about 20. This would mean 64,000 crore spent per year extra. And the number is 56 countries, not 50 countries or something. So our conclusion is that there could be major economic efficiencies from an evidence-based approach to recruitment and deployment policies. And the paper has important implications for school size policy as well. And it draws attention to the class size policy that is inherent in the Right to Education Act. In particular, I would like to, say that what is required is we need data on actual enrollment in schools, so that teacher allocation is not based on over-reported pupil enrollment. So one policy implication that comes out is that state governments should try to, and the Comptroller Auditor General, Material Authority should try and make an estimate of the actual enrollment in schools. It's a very well worth exercise to be done, because that will end up saving a lot of resources which are unnecessarily being given. And this panic that there's an acute teacher shortage would be addressed to some extent. And very importantly, it's important for states to consider how much of the problem of teacher shortage in some schools should be solved by net new hiring, and how much by reallocation of teachers from surplus schools to deficit schools. And what our paper does, which we have not been able to show here, is that there are, out of these 21 states, there are 13 or 14 states that have a net teacher surplus. So in those states, and you see, we also show that within the district, what is the scope for redeployment from surplus teacher schools to deficit teacher schools within a district. So there's quite a lot of scope for that. It's not the case that in every single district that's possible, but there's a huge scope for that within district redeployment from surplus to deficit schools. So that should be, so that's why we say that district-wide analysis within the state would be fruitful to see the scope of intra-district and intra-division redeployment of teachers. Now, final two statements. Transferring teachers is administratively difficult, and it is politically challenging. Let us not be naive about that. And yet the state needs to consider how fair it would be for the citizen, the taxpayer, to pay for this hedonic rent that a large number of individual teachers get from having assignments that are near their home, but with very few students to teach. And the states need to consider whether it is legitimate to incur large fiscal costs, not because we have too few teachers, but because the state will not or cannot reassign teachers from the very small schools or teacher surplus schools, and therefore not reach what is already the permitted limit of class sizes and pupil teacher ratio. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. I have a few questions, but I'll hold my thoughts just in the interest of time, and I'll come back to that. We'd love to hear from you, Professor Untitled, on your thoughts on this fascinating study. I think the question of fiscal space and teacher vacancies is always one that provokes a lot of thought, and something that we've also been struggling with, especially when we've been working with state governments where many of them have no incentive to fill the vacancies, even when they are genuine vacancies, because of the fiscal costs. So how do you kind of balance the need for good quality education and ensuring every teacher in every school, but also ensuring that you can kind of balance that fiscal cost? So we'd love to hear from you.
No, I have to go back to one of you.
Yeah, but we will. Thank you very much, team CPR, and thank you very much, Geeta. In fact, I sent Geeta a message that it was like the emperor has no clothes moment for me when I read this paper, because I think this is a very, very important paper, and this needs to be disseminated really widely. And the authors have done a commendable job of triangulating enrollment, both real and shown enrollment, pupil-to-teacher ratios that exist on the ground, skewed distribution, the long delay in adjusting formal teacher vacancies to actual enrollment. In fact, that is one area which is also, there is a huge time lag between the government's ability to adjust the teacher vacancies to the actual enrollment, and they don't do that. They carry on the teacher posts over and over again without really re-evaluating it. And of course, there is a huge, and of course, I'm so happy that they have really looked at the UDISE data so carefully, because many of us have known for many years that there are lots of problems with the UDISE data. And in my own qualitative work that I have done, when I try and compare the UDISE data with the data which is given in the annual work plan and budget or in the PAB minutes, there are huge discrepancies. And it is the same state government which is giving different data to different bodies for different arguments. And in fact, PAB minutes and the annual work plan budget data is very different from what is there in UDISE, especially on teacher vacancies. And And I have also been following this whole CAG argument, and which I think has a lot of merit, because when many public or private partnership agencies were providing midday meals, they came back and told the government that the food that they send according to the enrollment comes back because there aren't that many children there. So there is a huge issue of over-reporting of enrollment, and we know this has been happening for many years. But what I'm really happy about this paper is that this really, for the first time, really calls out and says, hey, please look at the UDISE data all over again, because any system reported data would have these kind of limitations and will have these kinds of problems. And that is why I think we need to have some independent sources of collecting data. I'd like to make a few comments. That first is that there is a big difference between elementary and secondary, and I'm sure Geeta recognizes that, because while in elementary enrollments have been coming down, in secondary enrollments have been going up, because the number of children who are completing 8 and going into 9 is going up. Second is NFHS 5 points to a much more rapid demographic transition and fall in child populations. So therefore, the child population projections which the ministry puts out along with the data in order to calculate net enrollment ratios needs to be recalibrated, because NFHS 5 has shown that the demographic transition which has happened and the child population rates may be much lower than what we are projecting at the moment. And therefore, it has great significance for actually calculating the total number of children. And I was quite interested in one part where the paper says that the total number of children enrolled in a particular state was actually more than the total number of children who were supposed to exist in that state. And I think that is a very serious issue. Now, let me come to a more substantive and a more qualitative analysis of the paper. Geeta, my own qualitative work over the years has revealed that actual enrollment does not match reported enrollment. And in every qualitative study, we have said that when we go into a school, however, most work that we have done on education, we have taken UDISE data at face value and have not questioned it. And I think this is one of the big mistakes. But however, what we have tried to do is try to triangulate what the UDISE data gives us with the net enrollment ratio, net attendance ratio that NSSO actually provides. The NSSO 75th round I've used quite extensively in 2 or 3 recent work that I have done, that while it captures both government and private enrollment, it still points to the big gap in UDISE data, because when UDISE also technically is supposed to report both government and private. The next point is there's a very difficult to get a handle on dropout rates, because UDISE data does not tell us how many children have moved to private schools as to how many children may have been shown as double enrollment. And because we have come across double enrollment, in fact, recently in Chittorgarh, I remember they said Kalana school. So they had to actually get the children back, and we didn't go. We just sat there, and they brought these children who were double enrolled. They were enrolled in the government school and they were also enrolled in the private school. So there is this whole issue of double enrollment, which is a serious issue in many states. At least I have seen it in Jharkhand and Rajasthan. And also, for many years now, since 2014, we have not done a household survey of the number of out-of-school children. Because from what estimates that people who are working on child labor tell you, that the number of children who are working above the age of 11 has been steadily going up with economic distress. So therefore, we don't have a handle on the number of children who have actually dropped out and who are child labor. So that is another dimensions to this. So therefore, what I am trying to say is that what the authors have done is very timely and also forces the reader to analyze discrepancies in data from different sources. And all of us need to do that. I'm not going to comment on the PTR conceptually, because as to what is the ideal one, though ASAR work has shown us there is no correlation between PTR and whatever assessment of learning that they have done. But there are two points which are related to PTR that I'd like to make. That when you look at global evidence, you find that in most primary schools, there's always a main teacher and an assistant teacher, which shows that at least in classes 1, 2, and 3, there is a need for more hands within the classroom in order to give individual attention to each teacher. This is a pedagogic point. This is not a point about data. Second is that we also know that from both government and private schools, including Kendriya Vidyalayas, the number of children who opt for private tuitions is very high. So I do not know whether the learning is happening because of the class size or because of private tuitions. I think the jury is still out on that, so I don't want to comment on what is the ideal. But the problem which Geeta and her colleague have pointed out is a very serious issue. Because when you have only 20 children in a school, there is no point having 2 teachers. I'm sure that one teacher can handle 20 children. But on the other hand, if we try to follow the route which China took many, many years ago, of actually rationalizing and busing children to schools which are located within, say, 4 or 5 villages, and creating these, that is what even NEP is talking about, school complexes. So maybe in schools wherever the infrastructure is good, maybe that may not be possible in Bihar. Maybe that may not be possible in the small hilly regions, states, of busing children to the nearest schools, but it is definitely possible in UP. It is definitely possible in many of the North Indian states. In Rajasthan, it is definitely possible. Now, let me come to the whole question of why these exercises which Geeta is recommending has not been done, or it is difficult to do. One, of course, as Geeta herself has said, teacher-related policies, especially with respect to appointments, deployment, have been very politically contentious issues. Even in a state like Karnataka, which has done some very good policy initiatives when it came to teacher transfers and teacher postings and teacher recruitment, even there is a huge mismatch between the Hyderabad Karnataka districts, that is Bidar, Bijapur and all that, the Dakshina Kannada districts and the other Kannada districts, because there is a whole politics of it, because bulk of the teachers are coming from southern Karnataka, and they're not willing to go and work in northern Karnataka. And this is also the problem in Orissa, that most of the teachers recruited are from coastal Orissa, who are not willing to go and work in the KBK region. In fact, the political parties are closely aligned to teachers, and they are not only their agents, they are also their polling staff. There is a huge close political patronage network, as Tara Bete's wonderful PhD thesis actually demonstrates in Rajasthan, which is actually coming in the way of reforming teacher policies. And teacher unions have remained one of the major stumbling blocks to bringing about any reform in this area. So therefore, lack of any comprehensive or reliable database that combines all this makes it difficult for the government or anybody else to negotiate with the teacher unions. Because if the teacher unions are using the fake data, and if you call the bluff on the fake data and say this is the real data, maybe you can open a few doors for negotiations. And as the paper says, those who don't want to continue, give them voluntary retirement and let them go to those areas and hire more teachers. Now, coming to tiny and small schools, it is known beyond doubt that over the last 20 years, in fact, I've been looking at it for 20 years, the number of small and tiny schools have been going up across the country. And a lot of this has to do with children moving out into private schools. It has a lot to do with the demographic transition. Kerala, for instance, the child population ratios have really come down. And even in Tamil Nadu, there has been a huge difference. So same in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So Goa, for instance, these are the states where the child population has actually drastically fallen. So therefore, I think it may be very important for us if the new census actually happens in 2022. However, you see, this has been a politically difficult issue for state governments to actually handle. But I don't think it's impossible, provided the government can actually come up with hardcore evidence on real enrollments and actual number of children in schools. Is rounding off to 30 to 60 to 100. I've seen that happen myself. That they say 60 bana do to itne teacher mil jayenge, 100 bana do itne teacher mil jayenge. You know, this kind of thing, that negotiations that happen between the school and the block level and the district level officials happens. It is so enrollment data is actually tweaked when the data is finally taken to the block office or the district office, when they actually rework on it. And that happens to especially in schools which are better located, which have a bus access, rather than schools which are remote. I find one area which is problematic, at least from my point of view, is that we should not be arguing to expand the pool of contract teachers. The reason why I'm saying it is because there is a constitutional right guaranteed of equal pay for equal work and equal working conditions. At least on that constitutional principles, I do feel if the requirement in the teacher workforce is teachers and not have any contract teachers. This is a point inside, because the reading between the lines, I see that, you know, there is a thing that, okay, contract teachers may be fiscally more efficient. I know it's fiscally more efficient, but I would have a constitutional issue. The last 2 points I have to make is, finally, one does not know how the COVID pandemic may have changed the scenario on the ground with respect to enrollment in private and government schools. Because anecdotal evidence tells us, and also the Center for Central Square Foundation's paper also talks about the huge number of private schools that have closed down during the pandemic. So I think post 2022-23, it is very important for us to keep that in mind. Yes, Bhavani, I'm just, you want me to repeat the contractual teacher point? The contract teacher point is that there has been a lot of arguments made that we need to continue, or we should not be so wary of the system of contract teachers. My only simple point is the Constitution guarantees equal work for equal pay and equal working conditions. So it is in that interest, in the principle of equality, that I feel that having 2 cadres of teacher having completely different working conditions and salaries is, for me, goes against the spirit of the Constitution of India. That is the point that I'm making. Concluding my comments, I know I have exceeded my time. What we need to do is, the time is ripe now to do a state-by-state stock taking of teachers, student enrollment, situation of small and tiny schools, surplus teacher schools, deficit teacher schools. And this needs to be done in every school complex, so that the school complex becomes a unit at which the planning is being done. So the school complex can be allocated a certain number of teachers, who are then reallocated to the various different schools. So this kind of approach, which is highly decentralized, may actually help us move towards a more realistic assessment and realistic planning. Second, of course, is, in fact, I was discussing this with Amit Kaushik as to what are the other kind of issues that really needs to come up, is that, you see, we need a huge reform in the way education data is being collected. There is a problem. And we know that there is a problem in the way, if teachers, it's a self-reported data, we don't have control over the quality of that data. Should there be some percentage of cross-checking? Should there be an independent body which goes and cross-checks? I don't know, but I think it will be worthwhile for us to come up with an alternative reformed data collecting mechanism, which may start with the data from the school, but there is a counter check on that, so that long absentees are not shown as enrolled children. And finally, I do feel that the whole issue of teacher training and teacher development, this has been one of the most neglected areas in India. And even if that is brought down to the school complex level, and everything is done at the school complex level, as the NEP 2020 is talking about, maybe we may be able to move towards a better situation and a more realistic situation. But Geeta and Datta, excellent paper, and I think it has really opened many of us, opened the possibilities of doing this kind of research by actually juxtaposing the real situation with what data actually tells us. Thank you very much, CPR and Geeta and her colleague Datta.
Thank you so much. Are we unmuted? Yeah. I think listening to you, Professor Ramcharan, I was just thinking that many years ago, I remember when UDISE was actively getting researchers to use the data. In fact, they used to have a 1 lakh rupee award, research award that people could apply for. And the theory came from exactly what you said. I think Dr. Mehta at that time was leading it, and he was very keen, saying that the only way that the DICE data is going to improve is if more and more people use it in a disaggregated manner and feedback studies. I wish there was more of that now, because it was amazing. I remember there were so many young students, young researchers. I know one of my colleagues also had applied. We should done some work on this, and it was constantly being used. And you could see that with increased usage, you could actually see the enrollment numbers falling in the data, because then they were saying that it forced them to kind of relook at the numbers and kind of complete the verification process. Unfortunately, nowadays there's such a time lag as well in terms of getting the DICE data.
And the amount of transparency has also gone down ever since Arun Mehta is not looking at it.
So I think that folks who've been looking at government data, we're really. I think it's been fascinating, because I think that's something that we're always struggling with, as you also generously said, of how do you triangulate, how do you make sense of data that just doesn't match. So thank you so much for your comments.
Can I come back?
Yeah, and I was going to also open it up after your responses.
Yeah. I'll come back very, very briefly on some of the points. I agreed with every single thing that Vimla has said. And thank you so much for your very positive feedback on the paper as well. And as you said, it should be widely disseminated, it's important, and so on. So thank you so much for that. Just a quick comment. I think both you said and Avni said that what we really need, and this is one of the recommendations of our paper, is that we need a single common methodology that is known, that is up on a website, and that all the states know, that when they make their calculations of our teacher vacancies, they make it on the basis of this methodology. The MHRD needs to come up with a single methodology. Why is it that their estimates, probably drawn from the annual work plan and budget process, are showing a teacher vacancy of 10,35,000 teachers in these 21 major states, and our analysis is showing 7,66,000 teachers? We are strictly applying, and what we have done in our paper is we've given the stata code that we have written in order to calculate the teacher vacancies, so that anybody can check how we have calculated the teacher vacancies. So if somebody tells us that, no, you've done something wrong, we'll revise the paper. But we believe that we have exactly applied in great detail, very strictly, the teacher allocation norms of the right to education. And that's how the teacher vacancies, we think, should be calculated. Now, let the MHRD have a methodology that it prescribes, that it makes transparent, and says that every single state should use this methodology. Not that each state is coming up with its own method and doing it. And in fact, this is a point that, Avni, when you calculated the per pupil expenditure, one of the points you make, and which I've also done, because when I was doing my work for the Prime Minister's office in 8-state study, I found exactly the same thing. You look at the state budgets, everybody is treating items differently in the different state budgets. So there isn't a common methodology, and that disables actually, a good analysis. So that's one thing, that the MHRD should have one single methodology. It should be visible to everybody that this is the way we calculate. Secondly, your point about double enrollment in many states is absolutely a fact. It's anecdotally so well known. And I think that Aadhaar card linkage is the thing that has helped. For example, Haryana reduced more than 5 lakh, I think 5.5 lakh children who were in the government enrollment, and they were removed after Aadhaar card linkage because they were double enrolled in private schools as well. Regarding busing children, again, I agree with you that it is possible in some states, and countries like China and so on, they also have their remote regions, but they have average school sizes. Now, you said that in some states it should be possible because infrastructure is good enough, like in Uttar Pradesh, and in other states infrastructure may not be good. Now, my response to that would be that, look, if policy-wise we decide that this is the route that we really want to go, because we want to provide schools that are well-resourced, every single school well-resourced and has all the facilities, then the amount of money that we spend already on maintaining a PTR of 25, or the amount of money that we're proposing to spend by recruiting another 1 million teachers, 10 lakh teachers, even a small fraction of that would be enough to make roads, if that's a one-off expenditure, and then the maintenance expenditure every year is a more minor expenditure. So I think that if somebody could do those calculations, it would be easy to show that it's a good investment. Infrastructure development will help the state in many other ways anyway. For economic growth, there are agriculture, marketing reasons, there's other logic for it. But this educational logic is such a strong logic in and of its own right. So I feel that can be done. That particular constraint could be relaxed. Regarding the NEP, regarding teachers not being willing to go to rural areas, like you said, in coastal Orissa, most of the teachers have been recruited from coastal Orissa, they're not willing to go into interior regions. That's true of most states, in terms of people not wanting to be deployed to rural areas. Now, the NEP recognizes that, and it explicitly says that they will be compensated. There will be policies to make it attractive for teachers to go to rural areas. So I think that, if that can, in all sincerity, be implemented, then that can be another helpful step in redeploying teachers more rationally. And just 2 last comments. Your point about contract teachers. See, in our paper, what we do is we take all the teachers. When we say how many teachers there are, so if in a school there's 1 contract teacher and 1 regular teacher, we don't say there's only 1 teacher. We say there are 2 teachers. In other words, we recognize contract teachers as teachers. That's all we do. We don't make any statement anywhere that contract teachers are okay or good or shouldn't be there or should be there. We are absolutely neutral about that. However, since you raised the point, although we don't say those in the paper, the point is that contract teachers are probably the ones who would get regularized if there was a move to have teachers that are regular teachers. It would not be that they will be let go and some new teacher will come as regular teacher. So it's a question of regularization of existing people who are called contract teachers. So number of teachers is not affected by this consideration of whether we make them regularized or not. The number of teachers is still what it is. And the best that would happen is that they get regularized. And lastly, the point about school complex, I'm a little less sanguine about the prospect of school complexes really delivering the goods and being a proper solution to the problem of tinification, minification of schools. And if we think that we can still resource them properly by having school complexes, which is what the National Education Policy suggests, I'm not so optimistic about that, because if we look at how teachers are chronically absentee, even in the 1 school where they have been deputed to, it seems a little unlikely that they'd be willing to travel to several schools within the cluster. So would they be able to be monitored? Do we have accountability systems in place that could enforce such, elicit such effort? But thank you very much for all your wonderful and really helpful comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you so much.
We have a few questions, I think, both from folks in Zoom, right?
There's somebody's hand up.
As well as in the room. If anyone has a question, just
Oh, hi.
No,
There-
sorry.
Thank you. So I'll just quickly point out the issue. Sorry.
You could just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sharbani Chakraborty. So with respect to the demographic transition, I have this additional question with respect to the state of Kerala. Now, of course, I've read a couple of contradictory reports. Just recently, there's been a report from Kasargod sub-district where they have said that there is teacher shortage of around 55 subjects and around 250 teachers or something. However, Kerala also has had this issue of uneconomic schools, not from like recently, but since the 1990s onwards, right? When the fertility started declining rapidly. So there are two issues of transition, migration of students to the private schools, but it is relatively lesser compared to other states. But it is primarily the fertility decline that is considered as the major cause of teacher surplus. The question is, since we know that most of the schools are in the private aided school, now there is a centralized list there in Kerala, right, through which the allocation takes place. There is also a cadre of protection teachers or protective teachers, that's what they are called. So there is a surplus there, plus there is a separate cadre. So is it possible to find out some kind of both regional variation, for instance, of Kerala, and also institutional variation, again, from Kerala, because of the problem of surplus teacher apparently is primarily focused in the private aided schools and not in so much in government schools. That is one of the issues of so regional and institutional variation. And with respect to contract teachers, I think we need to ask one question, that yes, and I'm absolutely not in favor of contract teachers. I need to make that point very clear. But this is based on my fieldwork in private aided schools and in government schools in Delhi. The teachers, the regular teachers, have asked me that how can they get more or equal salaries than me if they have lesser qualification than me. Now, one of the fundamental questions is, when we are talking about equal pay for equal work, then should we also take into account the human capital and the kind of opportunity cost that has gone into the education and the training of other teachers? And so there is anyway a conflict there with respect to contract teachers. So yeah, those are the two issues.
quickly,
You want to take this?
Sure.
Just a time. Question. You have to.
I'm Amit from Central Square Foundation. And not really a question, because I also had a privilege to go through Geeta's finding, and I have been talking about these findings as well. My major question is, what do we do with it? While our own understanding on just this fake enrollment is not really accepted, nothing done really to do something about it. So we understand the problem actually arises or revolves around political economy, and therefore what do we do with this is my question, because I've been talking about, but I don't see that ball going anywhere. So if there is some idea from here, also I would love to hear from Dr. Vimla Ramachandran, because she has also been talking something similar about it, and there seems to be quite a bit agreement in terms of the presenter and the discussion. So that's where I want to brainstorm a little bit.
We'll take one more. I think Shweta, you have a question? No, okay, go ahead.
I have just glanced through the, sorry, I'm Pooja, I'm coming from the recent field. I've just glanced through the paper, I'm so sorry I've not had the time to read it in detail. So when you do the fiscal mapping of the kind of extra costs that it might be to, is it just the salaries or is it also other resources that might get entailed in maintaining that PTR?
Only salaries.
Only salaries, and the salaries vary for contract teachers and regular teachers. So is that kind of variation also accommodated in the people? Again, I'll have to read through, maybe I will get the answer correctly. The other thing which does come to my mind naturally is NP has also talked about this pre-primary assimilation with the school itself, like pre-primary classes and the kind of things, and especially the financial implications even that might have. And even though it's very unrelated to elementary teachers, but just like a question out there that if we have pre-primary classes, if we deploy more pre-primary teachers in the school, that might also entail another different kind of financial implications of it.
This is separate to a lot of these things, but one of the things that seems to be happening, at least anecdotally, what we're picking up from states, especially in the last 3 years with DBT, is that there's a lot of investment that is going into the school through the student. So whether it outside of teacher salaries, so whether it is scholarships, uniforms, so on and so forth, and scholarships of various kinds, incentives, etc. And that is now part and parcel of the political economy of our electoral structure, and I don't think it's going to go away. So it's a very new dimension, all the kind of investments that we've been talking about. So there was always this question of teacher salaries versus everything else, and now that everything else is getting even more complex because of speed. Now, what does this do to incentive structures for this double enrollment problem? I don't know, but it's something to think about, and I'm not entirely sure how Aadhaar linked anything can actually resolve this, because there is incentive for parents to go through the government system, but also be attending, for their children to be attending private school. There's also a set of incentives that will come politically to try and move a lot of this money into as many bank accounts as possible for political reasons. So I'm just sort of, I don't know, I don't have a good enough grasp of it, because I think this is something new and it's actually game changing in some ways. But we don't fully understand what this is doing to how we think of the overall pool of investment and what kind of incentives it is creating, both for parents as well as for schools, to give you a more complicated enrollment story than we knew up until 2019-20 UDISE.
Very interesting question. If I may begin with addressing that one first, to the extent that anybody can. It's a difficult one. This is very, very true, and it's only going to make things very much more complicated. See, for instance, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, it's a phenomenon that's happening everywhere. Let me just take the example from Uttar Pradesh. So, the government has decided that what used to be government procurement of school uniforms and school bags and shoes, that the government decided that it's going to give instead of government procuring it and government distributing it, in which there was a lot of delay, plus probably a lot of leakages. The leakages we didn't hear so much about, but everybody heard about the delays. Sweaters would reach them on the 1st of February when winter was almost over, and things like that. And the quality was extremely low, and so on. So the government has made the change just from this academic year, that it's going to give, I think, 1,150 rupees per child for this thing. It is going to be given as a DBT directly into the account of the parent. So in order to do that, because the government wanted to do it from this year, last year they started the process of Aadhaar card link. Now, what I've heard from teachers who are going, home to home to get the Aadhaar cards of their students is that, because we have some relatives who, one of whom is a teacher, and she said that, what's happening is that because we don't have as many children as we've said in our UDISE data that we have, so we normally get the private school children to be double enrolled, So what we're doing is that we're telling those parents that if you give us the Aadhaar card number of your child so that we can show that they're enrolled, you'll get 1,150 rupees. So even the parent has an incentive to cooperate with the school to falsify the data. So you're absolutely right that this is going to make things even worse, because, or at least it's going to sew it up even more pakka, because the hope that one had with Aadhaar card linkage, and which has helped to some extent, for example, in Haryana, the 5.5 lakh children that were removed were double enrolled. With this sort of thing coming in, I think it's going to make it worse. And what will happen is that if there is this incentive to continue to over-report enrollment in order to get all this, now there's even greater incentive, because you get cash, which is fungible, right? So therefore, the enrollment numbers can go up even more, fake enrollment numbers, over-reported enrollment, and therefore, down the line, it has massive implications for the required number of teachers, because the assessment of the teacher requirements as per the Act is based on the reported number of children. So if you're over-reporting the number of children, or if you increase the extent of over-reporting, then you are making the case for more teachers. Everybody is happy. Parents are happy, school teachers are happy, administration is happy because it's getting more popular, and yet, there's theft all around, and it's a very compromised situation. So I'm not sure. I think this really goes to Amit's question, which is put to Vimla and myself. I'm hoping Vimla has some solutions because I certainly don't. Of what can be done about the political economy. I think Vimla already alluded to one thing. She said, well, don't despair so much, because at least if you provide the data, you make it, you are throwing out a challenge. You're saying, well, this is the reality. For instance, you were saying, Amit, earlier on, when we were in the met earlier, you said that in Assam, in the state of Assam, they have made the case for recruiting 50,000 teachers. Now, even the government's own data shows that in Assam, there were 13,000 vacancies, it shows, right? And, my thing is showing that there's 42,000, basically there's a net surplus of 14,876. Yeah, nearly 15,000 net surplus. And yet they're appointing 50,000 more teachers. So it is the political economy.
Mentioned this data to the Principal Secretary of Education Department. There, he too recognizes the problem, but said it's a political decision. I can't take it.
Yes, but the thing is that if you show this data to the education minister, to the chief minister, if you bring it out in the media, if the newspapers take an interest, I mean, what recourse have we as for example, as an academic, such as Vimla and I are, or as a consultant, or as researchers, as a think tank, what recourse do we have? We have the media through which we can raise that this is the absurdity of the situation. This is, naked, how shall I say, placating the public, or, what do you call it, populism. This is just populism.
It becomes a little difficult because less job, at least this is also a perceived problem. And the CM, it was his whole promise that he would give 1 lakh fresh new jobs, and where they have the maximum number where they could make the recruitment. So it was decided that 50,000 recruitment we are going to do. 30,000 have already been recruited by them.
Can I just add one more complexity in there? And I'm very sorry, but I'm
No, sure,
going to have to run. Which is that I actually think that finance departments, and Partha and I were chatting about as well, are far more recalcitrant about the idea of hiring full-time teachers than we give them credit for, precisely because they don't want to bear the fiscal cost. And so a lot of promises get made and monies don't get it in. There's been this constant tussle for a long time. So I actually don't think these NEP promises are in any way going to be a reality. That's a whole other challenge.
Yeah, that's another thing that they make these promises, they're not serious about them.
But the real issue to me that comes from your study is actually that we have a very irrational allocation structure. And there's a political economy behind that allocation, all that being said. But I think that is where we need to really have a lot more serious thinking. Because yes, to the extent that given the context of the economy, government jobs are going to be the only thing that politicians can promise. This is happening election after election. It will continue. The extent to which this will be fulfilled when the economy is shrinking, revenues are all of that. There's other things that will probably serve as some kind of check and balance. But the major issue, which has massive long-term repercussions on the ability of teachers to manage classrooms, is that they have a completely irrational way of allocating teachers because we are working on data that is essentially enrollment data that has huge problems and is likely to continue to have these problems.
It's true cross sectors, even health.
Yeah.
Big problem there. People
No,
are-
there's one more point which, I'm sorry, but there's one more point which is linked to what Yamini was saying. See, there is no comprehensive teacher database that puts together not only the service of the teacher, the academic qualifications, her subject specialization. See, the teacher database itself is a very truncated and disorganized teacher database. There is one which is linked to salary, there is nothing else. So even when we did the 9-state study, one of the main recommendations was we need a comprehensive database that will address some of the issues that Yamini is talking about, that you don't know, even the person sitting in the state capital almost doesn't know. Like in Rajasthan, they'll tell you there are no contract teachers because of the High Court ruling of 2014. My recent work in Chittorgarh, where I did, I found so many on the ground. Who are you? Why are you here? They're there because there were the secondary schools. I'm sorry, that was not elementary schools, because they don't have maths teachers. So they have to get somebody on contract. There's a shortage of chemistry teachers. So now some other day we should have a conversation on the mess in secondary and high secondary. But the mess in elementary is bad enough.
So just quickly to address the issue, salary of contract teachers, regular teachers. Actually, we have taken the salaries of regular teachers at the primary level. Now we know that 1/3 of schools are upper primary schools, but we've not taken their salary level because the contract teachers' salary levels were. Sandeep, can you just help me out on this one? Just remind me, did we take the contract teacher salary levels into account, or did we say that because
Yeah. Whatever it was available, we consider that the contract teacher salary. So,
because the contract teacher salary levels are different in the different states, and we had data from Vimala Ramchandran's study for 6 states for the actual teachers. So we've taken some average of that and then extrapolated that for all the states for the regular teachers, and then taken the actual salaries of contract teachers in the states for which we have data, and then ascribe that to contract teachers, and that's how we've come up with it. And our teacher salary estimates are underestimates. We know that they're underestimates because we did not take into account the salaries of the upper primary school teachers. And their numbers are not just 1/3. Reason being that although the number of upper primary schools, schools with upper primary sections or upper primary schools, is 1/3 of the number of primary schools, we know that the number of teachers in the upper primary schools is greater than just 1/3 more. Reason being because in the upper primary sections, you have to have a minimum of 3 teachers. Even if you had only 5 students in classes 6, 7, and 8 together, you still need a minimum of 3 teachers. That's the Act's stipulation. So therefore, the number of teachers will be significantly more than just 1/3. And we didn't take their high, we just attributed to every single teacher the primary teacher salary rate. Now there is a massive difference actually. For example, in Uttar Pradesh, the starting salary of a primary teacher in 2019-20 was 44,408 rupees per month, take home salary, 44,408. For a upper primary school teacher, the starting salary is 56,506 or something like that, 56,500 something. So there's a very big difference. But we wanted to err on the side of caution because we were taking averages across just 6 states and then attributing that for the whole of India. There is variation across states. We didn't want to be we wanted to err on the side of caution.
So, just on the contract teacher, Professor Ramachandran's latest paper on the teachers, she said that 95% of more than 95% of the schools that have only contract teachers are all in rural areas, right? 95.6 or something. So the question is, are they all small schools, tiny schools, or do you have any idea of that? Or are they like the schools which
But
have
I don't have the average school size here, but it makes sense that it would be, you know, the numbers would probably be, the enrollment numbers would probably be lower there. But I mean, I do have a data here on rural and urban, the bifurcation of rural and urban. I mean, although this data is looking at teacher surplus and vacancy numbers. So yeah, that this doesn't answer your question, but this can be. So yeah, your question, to answer your question, actually, our analysis did not look at aided schools, but you're absolutely right that in Kerala, there's been this massive demographic transition. It was probably the first state of India to have this massive reduction in the total fertility rate and therefore in the number of children born per woman. And that has just gone down like that. And that has reduced number of children for every kind of school. But yes, there is a massive shift, now in Kerala, I can tell you that the number of teacher vacancies in Kerala, as per the ministry's estimate, 1,926 teacher vacancies, as per 1,959, so almost the same. But the number of surplus teachers, the ministry doesn't estimate the number of surplus teachers. We've estimated that. The answer is, what is the number of surplus teachers in Kerala? 12,338. Therefore, net teacher surplus is 10,379. So there is an issue of surplus teachers even in the government sector, and I agree with you that a good proportion of that story would be because of the reduction in the child population. But it may also be that there is a shift to private schools because there is a massive shift to private schools even in Kerala. And one of the tables that I have not shown here, but which we have in the paper, it's in the full paper, is to show a situation of what we have called extreme teacher surplus. So, for example, a school having less than 20 children, but 3 or more teachers. So less than 20 children, average number of children is 12.7. So having 12.7 children on an average and having 3 or more teachers, typically it's more like 4.5 teachers in the schools that have 3 or more teachers. So having 12.7 children and something like 4 or 4.5 or 4.3 teachers, I mean, an extremely low pupil-teacher ratio. Kerala is an outlier for such schools. That means Kerala has a very high proportion of such schools. The number of schools is small, which have that. But as a proportion of all their schools, it's a high number where they have an extreme instance of teacher surplus.
Thank you.
We have a few questions, just to be in interest of fairness. Vicky, could you just show them up? In detail, while you're on what is done in local level, not at state level, what the mechanisms to take to get more accurate data on enrollment. And while the PTR seems good in many schools, there's a big problem of multi-grade classrooms. 30 children in a primary school with 2 teachers will be distributed across grades 1 to 5. 2 teachers will be teaching 3 or more subjects for 5 grades. How do you factor multi-grade classrooms while looking at PTR? And I had a similar question of how do you account for subject, like RT norms also talk about subject-specific teachers?
Yeah, for classes 6, 7, and 8, exactly. The RT norms talk about that. Is why they say that there have to be a minimum of 3 teachers. Exactly. Irrespective, even if you've got 5 children, exactly. You have to provide 3 teachers. So that's why they have that, because they say that for maths there has to be a subject there, for science and for languages. Yeah. Right. So, so that's how the RT Act does it. And
how did you account for it?
We have accounted for that in the sense that we say that any upper primary classes, any school that has upper primary classes must have 3 teachers for that. So we, in our program, we have taken that into account.
So in terms of number of teachers? In
terms of number of teachers that are required. So that if a school has lesser teachers than that number, then it will show up as a teacher deficit. In our calculation of teacher deficit, that will show. Now, these are important questions. And I think it's absolutely a fact. And I think that what it leads to is the very, almost, in my first slide, the question that we raise in our paper is, what should be the minimum viable school size in order that you can give them adequate number of teachers so that all subjects and all classes can be taught properly. If there are only 12.7 children in the school as a whole, right? Yeah. And you are absolutely right to raise the issue that, well, if you give them only 2 teachers, they're still having to teach multiple classes, grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all the subjects. Just these 2 teachers are having to. Never mind that they have 12.7 children, but even for those 12.7 children, some will be in grade 1, some will be in grade 3, 2, 5, 4, and so on. And they will be learning all the subjects. So it's not. Therefore, I think that the issue is one of what is the minimum viable school size? We don't have a policy on minimum viable school size. Our country lacks, it has a policy on maximum pupil-to-teacher ratio, but we don't have a policy. What is the minimum size of schools that we will tolerate, beyond which we will close down that school and, create, ensure that those children have access to a nearby other school. We don't have such a policy. Now, some states have gone ahead and done school consolidation by creating an ad hoc policy. For example, Maharashtra first created the policy that any school that has 20 or fewer children, we will close down. And then there were 14,000 such schools roughly. And there was a protest. And then they said, no, we won't do that. We will, there were local elections. They said, we won't do it now, we'll do it later. And later on, they decided that we'll close down only those schools that have 10 or fewer children in the school as a whole. And that was about 4,000 schools that they did close down and then consolidate. Similarly, with the Rajasthan, their policy was 20 children or less than 20 children, they would consolidate. And I think they consolidated something like 18,000 schools were consolidated. So some states have come up with a policy like that. That below that, we will not continue to maintain such a small school, we will merge them.
We're completely out of time. I know that Dr. Gandhiman also has to go. Any final thoughts from you? And then we can close the discussion.
No, I don't have any final thoughts. Just one thing, in Rajasthan also, do you know when those Rajiv Gandhi Pathshalas and those additional schools were started, each village had 2-3 schools. And therefore that consolidation was possible. During those Rajiv Gandhi Pathshalas which were opened in the mid-90s, the same village, and then Dalit children went to that and the non-Dalit children went to the other school. So now, therefore, there were a lot of other issues in Rajasthan, but they were able to, now the number says about 14,000 or so they have done.
I mean, one last comment.
Political will.
Exactly on this point, that you see, one of the fallouts, one of the implications or consequences of that policy that arose from the Kothari Commission's recommendation to give a school locally to every child. One of the unintended consequences of that, which an author called Anjani Kochar at Stanford University has highlighted. I happen to be the reviewer for her, I think it was the American Economic Review or Journal of Development Economics. I was the reviewer for that paper. She points out, and she shows the evidence for it in her paper, that what happened as a result of that policy is that if there's a village, it has some hamlets, and those hamlets are caste segregated, because the hamlet is at a distance of 1 kilometer, it has to have its own little school. And this village, main village, of which this hamlet is a satellite, has its own school. Therefore, it has led to caste segregation. This policy of providing a school within very close proximity for every single habitation has led to caste segregation of children.
That's what we also showed in our 2004 hierarchies of access. For the Dalit areas had their own school. The Adi Dravid areas in Tamil Nadu have their own schools, even though it's part of the same village. But they're just 2 habitations in the same village. This happened in many states. In Tamil Nadu, it happened because the Adi Dravida board wanted to start its own schools. And this Rajiv Gandhi Pathshala was a political gimmick to show that we are going to have a school in every Dalit hamlet. But what happened was that those schools never got teachers. So the children actually suffered. Anyway, I think I need to leave because I have a persistent grandson who's waiting for his stories. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you so much for joining, and we are closing the discussion.
Okay.
But,
And thank you, Geeta, and thank you, Datta, so much.
Thank you, Vimala. That was amazing. Thank you for reading our
Professor
paper.
Ramachandran. Thank you.
Bye-bye.